happen if 31 armed pirate boats launched a lightning assault on a vessel carrying the lifeblood of an American aircraft carrier group? This is no hypothetical, it was the reality on July 5, 2025, when the sweltering waters off the Somali coast erupted into one of the most audacious pirate attacks in modern history. In a world already strained by the war in Ukraine, the escalating confrontation between Israel and Iran, and the intensifying rivalry between Washington and Beijing, this strike on a US Navy supply ship sent shockwaves far beyond the Indian Ocean. The ship, officially designated Logistics Vessel 72 Delta, had been disguised as a civilian cargo freighter. Its mission was simple, yet vital, to deliver high-density jet fuel explosive stabilizers and sensitive avionics components to an aircraft carrier patrolling the Arabian Sea. Without this supply line, the F-35 fighters on board the carrier would remain grounded and long-range missile batteries would stay silent. In short, it was not just another logistical run, it was the artery that kept American naval power alive in the region. At 6:12 a.m., the radar alarm broke the silence. 31 speedboats, each moving at over 50 knots, slashed across the horizon like a swarm of hornets. Packed with over 240 pirates wielding RPGs, heavy machine guns, and makeshift boarding gear, this was no ragtag band of opportunists. According to analysts at Jane's Defense Weekly, the attack bore all the hallmarks of a pre-planned military-style operation, possibly financed through clandestine networks stretching from East Africa to the Persian Gulf. Gunfire cracked through the morning air as RPGs slammed into the ship's outer hull. A dozen pirates laid down suppressing fire, forcing the American sailors, just 10 in total, into cover behind steel containers. Another team threw grappling hooks and began climbing. Within minutes, the bridge was overrun. 5 Americans were dead, 3 more wounded, and the survivors bound on deck at gunpoint. To the pirates, this seemed like another lucrative capture to ransom off in a coastal stronghold. What they failed to realize was that the ship's captain, a former Navy lieutenant, had triggered a silent distress signal seconds before being subdued. That signal, routed directly to the nearby carrier group, would change the course of the battle. Western observers have compared the scale of this ambush to asymmetric attacks seen in other conflict zones. Defense News highlighted similarities to Houthi rebel swarms in the Red Sea, where drones and speedboats attempt to overwhelm naval vessels. Yet the Somali pirates made a critical miscalculation. They struck a vessel that was not only American, but strategically irreplaceable. In Washington, President Donald Trump was briefed almost immediately. His reported words, according to a senior official cited by Reuters, were blunt: "No one hijacks an American ship and survives. End it." The timing could not have been worse for global stability. NATO allies were already on edge over Russia's intensified missile strikes near Kharkiv in late June, while Israel's campaign against Iranian proxies in Syria had escalated into direct air clashes. A successful pirate seizure of US classified cargo would not only embolden criminal syndicates, but potentially funnel advanced materials into the hands of hostile states. Experts at the Royal United Services Institute in London warned that the pirates' involvement with black market intermediaries could have led to sensitive compounds ending up in Iranian or even Russian hands, an outcome NATO planners considered unacceptable. As the hijacked ship drew closer to the Somali coastline, celebrations broke out among the attackers. They believed the battle was won, but intelligence screens inside the Pentagon and aboard the USS Liberty carrier told a different story. For every knot the pirates' advanced US forces were preparing a retaliation measured not in hours, but in minutes. Admiral Peter Sloan, the strike group commander, reportedly told his staff, "This will not be a ransom negotiation. This will be an example." The situation posed broader strategic lessons. Modern warfare is not just fought on open battlefields, it plays out in supply lines, ports, and narrow sea lanes where even small actors can cause disruption. NATO's Maritime Command has repeatedly warned that the defense of logistics is as crucial as the deployment of frontline combat power. The Somali ambush proved that weakness in logistics invites predation, yet it also set the stage for America's overwhelming response, a response that would echo from Mogadishu to Moscow, from Tehran to Beijing. So as the pirates cheered and the sailors lay bound on deck, the world was left asking, how fast could America strike back, and how devastating would that response be? How much power can a single button press hold in the balance of war? For the hijacked crew aboard Logistics Vessel 72 Delta, that silent distress call became the razor-thin line between despair and salvation. At 6:15 a.m., just 3 minutes after the pirates stormed the bridge, the coded signal reached the operations center of the USS Liberty, the lead carrier of the American strike group patrolling less than 200 kilometers away. The signal carried the highest possible urgency, priority 1, hostile capture of high-value naval asset. Within seconds, alarms blared across 3 US Navy vessels and 2 airborne command centers. There would be no debate, no diplomatic back and forth. Rear Admiral Peter Sloan's order was crisp, unflinching, and echoed across the carrier's decks: initiate Operation ThunderNet. We go now. The decision to move immediately reflected both military necessity and the larger geopolitical climate. With President Donald Trump demanding an uncompromising response, Pentagon officials recognized that hesitation would signal weakness to adversaries already probing Western resolve. In Europe, Russia's relentless missile campaign in Ukraine had just leveled an industrial complex near Dnipro, raising NATO fears of escalation. Meanwhile, China's Navy had conducted live-fire drills around Taiwan that same week, testing Washington's ability to project force in multiple theaters. To stand down in Somalia would have emboldened rivals watching closely. Inside, the USS Liberty preparations unfolded with calculated fury. 10 MH-60 Seahawk helicopters were rolled onto the flight deck, each preloaded with 30 elite fighters, Navy SEALs, and Marine Raiders trained in close-quarters combat and hostage rescue. 300 of America's best handpicked for missions where failure was not an option. Below deck, 20 MQ-25 Stingray drones were fueled and armed with dual micro-bomb bays, thermal sensors, and encrypted communications designed to scan and strike with machine precision. Overhead, 5 FA-18 Super Hornets roared to life, their wings bristling with precision-guided bombs and miniguns capable of shredding a speedboat in seconds. Defense analysts at Deutsche Welle noted that the composition of ThunderNet mirrored lessons from Ukraine's drone-centric warfare, layered strikes, real-time surveillance, and overwhelming force applied in rapid succession. The US Navy has fully absorbed modern asymmetric tactics, observed Dr. Carla Henning, a Berlin-based military strategist. They now meet swarming threats with swarming responses, drones against boats, hornets against fortified positions, and special forces for surgical hostage recovery. The psychological component was equally critical. By authorizing Operation ThunderNet, Admiral Sloan ensured that the pirates never had the luxury of consolidating their victory. The hijackers believed they had hours, perhaps days, before the US could mobilize. In reality, less than 9 minutes after the distress call, American aircraft already thundered across the Indian Ocean satellites, locking onto the vessel's exact coordinates. For NATO, this was more than an isolated operation. Maritime logistics had become the Achilles heel of Western power projection, with Russia exploiting shipping corridors in the Black Sea and Iran repeatedly threatening oil tankers in the Strait of Hormuz. By moving instantly and decisively in Somalia, Washington aimed to reassure its allies that American supply chains would never be left undefended. The pirates, still unaware of what was coming, were steering their prize toward a coastal haven long considered untouchable, a fortified compound serving as both black market hub and pirate sanctuary. Intelligence analysts had tracked its activity for years, but international strikes had always faltered amid political hesitation and local corruption. If the captured cargo reached that compound, US officials feared it could be dismantled, resold, or funneled into hostile arsenals. Sensitive missile stabilizers and avionics might end up in Iranian labs or even in Russian hands, where reverse engineering could compromise Western systems. Trump administration officials briefed Reuters later that morning, stressing the symbolic weight of the incident. America cannot and will not allow its lifelines to be severed, one senior aide said. This isn't just about pirates. This is about every adversary from Tehran to Beijing watching our response. The operation was thus framed not only as a hostage rescue, but as a global statement of deterrence. Admiral Sloan himself is reported to have told his officers, "We are not just rescuing sailors, we are drawing a red line for the world." As MQ-25 drones surged ahead to scout Hornets fanned wide to flank and Seahawks skimmed the waves with their human cargo, the stage was set for a confrontation unlike anything seen in the Indian Ocean in decades. The pirates thought the battle was over. In truth, it was only beginning. The critical question now hung in the air: would the rescue unfold with surgical precision or spiral into a bloodbath on the high seas? What happens when the might of a superpower converges on a single target in less than 15 minutes? That was the question answered by Operation ThunderNet as the skies above the Indian Ocean lit up on July 5, 2025. While the pirates believed they were hours away from safe harbor, the United States Navy was already bearing down on them with a meticulously layered assault. 3 distinct waves were launched, each with a specialized mission. The first wave was led by MQ-25 Stingray drones, flying low across the ocean's surface to maintain stealth and radar evasion. Equipped with thermal sensors and AI-assisted targeting, their role was to identify and neutralize any pirate escort craft. In less than 60 seconds, 4 boats shadowing the hijacked vessel were marked for destruction. Microbombs rained down, detonating with surgical precision, reducing the escorts to twisted fragments of metal. Jane's Defense Weekly later remarked that the efficiency mirrored Ukrainian drone strikes on Russian riverine convoys, proving the growing dominance of unmanned systems in naval warfare. The second wave came from above. FA-18 Super Hornets screaming in from altitude unleashed torrents of minigun fire along the supply ship's upper decks. Pirate firing positions and sandbag emplacements disintegrated under the hail of rounds. RPGs exploded in midair, cut down before they could be launched. One analyst at Defense News compared the strike to Israel's precision raids on Hezbollah coastal bunkers earlier this year, where overwhelming aerial dominance shredded ground resistance before infantry ever arrived. The third wave was the most daring. 10 MH-60 Seahawk helicopters skimmed just meters above the water, hidden in the radar shadow zone until the last possible second. Ropes dropped and 300 Navy SEALs and Marine Raiders stormed onto the vessel in synchronized teams. Every movement was practiced, honed, and lethal. Within seconds, fire teams fanned out across the decks, breaching compartments, clearing hallways, and neutralizing hostiles room by room. From the bridge to the engine room, American operators executed the kind of shipboarding mission often considered too risky in exercises, let alone real combat. One squad breached the control deck with flashbangs, eliminating 2 armed pirates before they could react. Another stormed the engine compartment, suppressing resistance with precision fire. By the time the hostages were located, bound bloodied but alive, the tide of battle had already turned. Medics treated the wounded sailors on the deck, while SEALs established a perimeter defense. The entire boarding and clearance operation lasted just 8 minutes. Every pirate on board was either neutralized or captured. Not a single American hostage was lost. To observers in Washington, London, and Brussels, the operation displayed the effectiveness of joint force doctrine drones, fighters, helicopters, and elite infantry working in seamless unison. Yet the mission did not end there. Surveillance from MQ-25 drones revealed the looming threat just beyond the horizon, a heavily fortified pirate compound 7 nautical miles inland. The site, long immune to international retaliation, contained vehicle bays, radar equipment, and arms depots. For years, it had been the beating heart of black market trafficking, financing piracy operations across the Gulf of Aden. If left untouched, it would rise again, regrouping with new recruits and weapons. Admiral Sloan faced a choice extract and retreat or strike, while America's momentum was absolute. His decision was immediate: switch targets. Bring it down. This escalation mirrored broader strategic thinking in Washington. NATO allies had been pressing the US to demonstrate its capacity for rapid overmatch at sea, especially after months of contested supply lines in Ukraine and Iranian harassment in the Gulf. By extending ThunderNet to destroy the pirate stronghold, the US Navy intended not just to rescue, but to deter. As the Hornets, armed with GBU-32 JDAM bombs, wheeled inland, Western experts immediately noted the broader implications. This was not simply a counter-piracy raid, argued Dr. Michael Anderson of the Center for Strategic and International Studies in an interview with BBC World. It was a rehearsal for future conflicts against near-peer adversaries, Russia in the Arctic, China in the South China Sea, where logistics could be the difference between victory and defeat. The strategic signal was clear in Donald Trump's America. No disruption of supply lines would go unanswered. Whether by pirates, militias, or state-backed forces, the message was the same: touch America's lifelines and expect devastation. The hijacked vessel was secure. The hostages were alive. But as American jets banked toward the Somali coast, the question became, how much destruction would it take to erase a pirate fortress that had defied international law for a decade? What does overwhelming force look like when unleashed from the sky? At precisely 7:01 a.m., the Somali coastline witnessed the answer. The hijacked American supply ship drifted within visual range of land, but instead of reaching sanctuary, it became the epicenter of a storm that would level a pirate empire. From the east, MQ-25 Stingray drones swept low, silent, and deadly. Their thermal sensors locked onto 4 pirate escort boats, maneuvering to shield the hijacked vessel. In a display of modern precision, the drones released microbombs that struck with pinpoint accuracy. Columns of water and flame erupted, and in less than 12 seconds, the entire flotilla was annihilated. Naval analysts at Defense News later pointed out that this strike was a textbook example of layered drone warfare similar to Ukraine's destruction of Russian patrol craft in the Black Sea earlier in the summer. Seconds later, the sky cracked with the roar of 2 FA-18 Super Hornets diving from altitude. Their miniguns stitched the ship's deck with streams of fire, tearing apart pirate firing nests and detonating RPG stockpiles before they could be used. Survivors scattered in panic, but escape was impossible. From the west, 10 MH-60 Seahawk helicopters appeared like phantoms, hovering just above the waves before disgorging their human payload, Navy SEALs and Marine Raiders descending by rope in a near-perfect choreographed assault. The boarding action was as swift as it was merciless. Fire teams stormed compartment after compartment, neutralizing pirates with suppressed fire and flashbangs. The bridge was retaken in under 90 seconds, 2 hijackers killed before they could raise their rifles. Another squad cleared the engine room, while medics treated the bound and battered sailors, stabilizing the wounded and moving them to a secure deck. The operation's precision was so exact that Western commentators compared it to Israel's famed Entebbe raid, though this one unfolded on a moving vessel with even tighter margins. By 7:09 a.m., the ship was secure. Not a single American life was lost in the rescue. Yet the mission had only entered its second phase. Surveillance drones relayed live footage of the pirates' inland base, fortified walls, weapons depots, fuel stores, and radar stations. It was the operational heart of Somali piracy, a hub that had withstood years of international condemnation and half-hearted attempts at eradication. For Admiral Sloan, hesitation was not an option. Switch targets, he commanded. Bring it down. The Hornets wheeled inland their bomb bays, opening over the compound. At 500 feet, they released GBU-32 JDAM satellite-guided bombs that smashed into command bunkers, tearing concrete into dust. Flames shot skyward as secondary explosions erupted from hidden fuel and ammunition stores. The compound's communications towers crumbled, radar arrays toppled, and vehicles in reinforced bays were incinerated in place. But the assault didn't stop there. MQ-9 Reaper drones joined the fray, releasing Hellfire missiles into bunker entrances and concealed tunnels. One missile ignited a massive underground stockpile of munitions, triggering a chain of detonation so violent that it collapsed half the compound into rubble. The shockwave was visible on satellite feeds, shared later with NATO allies. From the air to the ground, the operation was relentless. Marine Raiders landed on the compound's smoldering perimeter by CH-53 helicopters sweeping through alleys and collapsed structures with infrared goggles and drone feeds guiding them. Resistance collapsed in minutes. Over 500 pirates were neutralized, dozens more captured alive for interrogation. By 7:30 a.m., what had once been an untouchable fortress was nothing more than smoking ruins. Western experts quickly drew parallels to NATO's broader challenges. The compound's destruction demonstrated not only US resolve, but also its willingness to strike decisively against entrenched sanctuaries, a warning to Russian positions in Crimea, to Iranian militias in Syria, and to Chinese naval outposts in the South China Sea. This was more than a counter-piracy raid, noted Professor David Reynolds of King's College London in a BBC World broadcast. It was a live-fire message that the US under Trump will apply overwhelming force to secure logistics and punish challengers regardless of geography. For the Somali pirates, years of dominance ended in less than half an hour. For America's rivals, the message was impossible to ignore. But the burning question remained, was this strike an isolated warning or the blueprint for how Washington intends to respond to future threats from state actors as well as pirates? What does it take to erase a criminal empire in under 30 minutes? By sunrise on July 5, 2025, the answer was visible across the Somali coastline. Fireballs, smoke columns, and silence where once stood a fortress that had financed piracy for a decade. The destruction of the pirate compound was not just about neutralizing a base. It was a geopolitical demonstration, one that resonated from NATO headquarters in Brussels to military command centers in Moscow and Beijing. For years, Somali piracy had been treated as a regional nuisance. International patrols, intercepted boats, occasionally seized weapons, but rarely struck at the heart of the networks. That changed with Operation ThunderNet. Once the compound's perimeter collapsed under airstrikes, US Marines executed a sweeping ground assault. Equipped with infrared goggles and guided by real-time drone feeds, they advanced through alleys and tunnels that had once offered the pirate sanctuary. Resistance was quickly silenced. By the time the smoke cleared, more than 500 pirates were dead, dozens captured, and a stockpile of weapons and fuel had been reduced to rubble. A senior NATO officer quoted by The Guardian called it the most decisive counter-piracy strike in modern naval history. The timing was significant. Across the world, maritime choke points were already under siege. In the Black Sea, Russia had resumed strikes on Ukrainian grain ports, threatening NATO's food security corridor. In the Red Sea, Iranian-backed Houthi forces were once again targeting oil tankers with drones and missiles, forcing Western navies into near-constant patrols. By obliterating the Somali base, Washington sent a broader signal America would not hesitate to apply overwhelming force against threats to sea lanes, whether criminal or state-backed. Western defense experts underlined the importance of this shift. Logistics has become the new frontline, remarked General Mark Caldwell, retired U.S. Army commander, in an interview with Reuters. Pirates, militias, even major powers now target supply lines because that's where vulnerability lies. The U.S. response off Somalia proved that logistics will be defended with the same ferocity as a carrier or a fighter wing. The symbolism was not lost on adversaries. Russian state media immediately condemned the strikes, portraying them as overreach and warning that U.S. aggression in Somalia mirrors its escalations in Ukraine. Meanwhile, Chinese analysts in the Global Times suggested that Beijing would study ThunderNet closely, particularly the integration of drone strike aircraft and special forces in layered rapid response missions. The Chinese Navy has been expanding similar capabilities in the South China Sea, where contested reefs and artificial islands are increasingly militarized. For Israel, embroiled in skirmishes with Iranian-backed militias across Syria and Lebanon, the operation offered validation. Israeli security officials told Al Jazeera that the U.S. raid proved once again the decisive role of drones and air dominance in denying sanctuary to irregular forces. Indeed, parallels were obvious. Just as pirates lost their stronghold in Somalia, Hezbollah has faced relentless aerial bombardments on its border depots. Within NATO, Operation ThunderNet sparked debate over whether the alliance should adopt a more aggressive doctrine against asymmetric threats. Germany's Deutsche Welle reported growing support among European partners for expanded rules of engagement in contested waters, particularly after repeated Russian attempts to intimidate shipping routes in the Baltic Sea. ThunderNet wasn't just an American show of force. DW argued it was a template for NATO's maritime security future. On the ground, the aftermath was stark. The pirate compound, once bustling with black market traders, weapons convoys, and smuggling routes, was reduced to ash. Locals described the scene as a graveyard of fire, with warehouses collapsed and entire vehicle bays still burning hours later. Somali officials, long criticized for turning a blind eye, quickly welcomed the U.S. strikes as a necessary blow against terrorism and lawlessness. Critics, however, warned that without local governance reforms, new groups could eventually rise from the ruins. For Washington, however, the outcome was clear. The U.S. Navy had not only rescued its sailors, but destroyed an operational hub that had mocked international law for years. The operation reaffirmed President Trump's pledge voiced earlier in the year after Iranian missile strikes on Gulf shipping that any hand raised against America's sea lanes will be cut off. The destruction of the pirate stronghold was complete, but a strategic question lingered. Would America's adversaries interpret this as a one-off warning or as proof that even they with far greater arsenals than Somali pirates could face the same fate if they dared to test U.S. resolve? What lesson echoes loudest when a pirate fleet is annihilated in under an hour? For strategists in Washington, Brussels, and London, the Somali raid underscored a single truth. America's power is measured not just by its carriers or fighter squadrons, but by its ability to defend the arteries that keep them alive. The rescue of logistics vessel 72 Delta became more than a military victory. It was a declaration of intent. In the age of asymmetric threats, where speedboats, drones, and proxy militias can cripple billion-dollar war machines by severing their supply lines, the U.S. showed that logistics are not soft targets. They are hardwired into America's global strike network and defended with overwhelming force. NATO officials hailed the operation as a turning point. A senior maritime commander in Brussels speaking to BBC News described ThunderNet as a playbook for 21st century naval warfare. The alliance, he said, would incorporate lessons from Somalia into Baltic Sea patrols, where Russian naval harassment of merchant ships has intensified. Likewise, France and Italy, long frustrated by piracy off Africa's east coast, called for deeper integration of drone fleets and precision air assets into NATO's maritime doctrine. For adversaries, the implications were sobering. Russian analysts admitted privately, according to The Guardian, that the speed of the US response in Somalia demonstrated a level of readiness they could not easily replicate in the Black Sea. China, meanwhile, noted parallels to its own vulnerabilities in the South China Sea. Despite expanding naval bases on artificial islands, Chinese supply convoys remain susceptible to the same swarming tactics the Somali pirates employed. ThunderNet proved that America had perfected counter-swarm warfare, blending drones, fighters, and special forces into a seamless machine. The timing of the strike amplified its strategic weight. Just days earlier, Russia had escalated missile attacks near Kharkiv, while Israel struck deep into Syrian territory in response to Iranian arms shipments. By acting decisively in Somalia, President Donald Trump's administration reminded allies and adversaries alike that America could project power globally, even while managing multiple crises. A White House statement later reinforced this point. From the Black Sea to the South China Sea, the United States will defend its supply lines and those of its allies. Piracy is not just crime, it is a national security threat, and it will be treated as such. Western experts emphasize that the raid also addressed a long-standing vulnerability. For years, piracy had been viewed as a nuisance rather than a strategic danger, but in an interconnected world, even small actors could create ripple effects. Dr. Evelyn Brooks of the Royal United Services Institute warned that if the pirates had succeeded in selling missile stabilizers or avionics to hostile states, the cost would have been measured in more than ransom. It could have tilted the battlefield in Ukraine or the Gulf. The human element cannot be ignored either. The sailors, bound and beaten, were rescued alive, their survival owed to the captain's quick activation of the distress beacon and the Navy's unrelenting speed. Their ordeal highlighted both the dangers of contested waters and the value of rigorous training and readiness. For American families, it was a reminder that even the most routine missions can become flashpoints in a volatile world. Yet questions remain. Can such overwhelming responses be sustained in every scenario? What if the next hijacking is backed not by pirates, but by Russian mercenaries or Chinese maritime militias? Will NATO allies match America's ferocity or rely once again on US dominance? ThunderNet may have been a tactical success, but strategically it opened debates about escalation cost and the blurred line between criminal networks and state proxies. Still, the message etched into the smoking ruins of Somalia was undeniable. America will not tolerate assaults on its sea lanes. As NATO planners draft new strategies, and as Russia, Iran, and China assess their vulnerabilities, the world is left to consider, was Somalia merely the prelude to a doctrine that will shape the next decade of maritime warfare? The July 5, 2025 attack on logistics vessel 72 Delta began as a daring ambush by 31 pirate boats, but ended in one of the fastest, most decisive US naval operations of the century. Armed with RPGs and heavy machine guns, the pirates overran the disguised supply ship in minutes, killing 5 sailors and capturing the rest. Unknown to them, the captain had triggered a distress signal that launched Operation ThunderNet, a layered assault involving drones, FA-18 Hornets, and MH-60 Seahawks carrying 300 elite troops. Within minutes, drones obliterated escort boats, Hornets shredded deck defenses, and SEALs retook the vessel with surgical precision. But Admiral Sloan escalated further. American jets and drones leveled the pirates' inland fortress, erasing a decade-old black market hub and neutralizing over 500 fighters. The operation carried strategic weight beyond Somalia. It showcased US mastery of drone-integrated warfare, reassured NATO of America's readiness, and sent warnings to Russia, Iran, and China that supply lines will be defended with overwhelming force. For allies, it was a model for countering asymmetric threats. For adversaries, it was a chilling reminder that America's reach remains global and uncompromising. Will ThunderNet remain an isolated strike or a template for future